and that's by Councillors Andy Doig and John Hoods. Councillor Doig.
Thanks, Provost. I appreciate this is an extremely localised motion, but it's one that I really felt I had to bring to the budget meeting, because about a month ago, McGills buses announced on their website, with only about maybe a week or so to go, that they would be withdrawing part of the 307, 307A Johnstone to Lochwinnoch service, which goes up to the Braehead scheme in Lochwinnoch, both in the evenings and at weekends. Now, I wrote to McGills, and I mean, I have to say, I mean, McGills buses, they're very modern, they're very warm, they're very up to date. They run a good bus service. I have to say, in terms of liaison and communication, I think they've been really poor. They took 16 days to get back to me, despite the fact I'd asked for a meeting between all ward members and McGill's management. But when they did get back, they said...
Andy, could you hold on, please? Can everyone check the microphones? Thank you. What, try again, Andy?
Okay, they did. When they did get back, they explained that this was a contractual issue in relation to the size of the buses that we're using in the 307 route. Now, I've since replied to them to say, well, look, they explained that their contract is up in July for this route, and I would imagine they'll be renewing it. So at that point, will they then be able to get larger buses, smaller buses, in order to service the route? Part of the reason I wanted to bring it before full council as well was I thought there was a wider issue here, because the issue McGills gave on their website as to the cancellation of part of the route was due to traffic congestion. And we know a lot of your housing schemes were built in the 50s and 60s. They weren't built for the level of car ownership that we have now, but the council's got various strategies we're trying to agree to deal with that. And that's why I'm disappointed that McGills really should have came and talked to the relevant officers, should have talked to ourselves, local ward members, to try and resolve it, because this is an issue that could then be duplicated in every ward in Renfrewshire. So I'm hopeful that when McGills do get back, they will say that come July. I've also approached Councillor Andy Steele, who's the SPT rep for the council. Hopefully come July, they will then be able to source the smaller vehicles once again to resume the service, because it's really important that people in our communities are not isolated. If you live up, the Braehead scheme is really built on a hill. For those of you who don't know Lochwinnoch, and you know, people up there, they depend on the 307 to get to Lochwinnoch station, to go to work in Johnstone, Paisley, Glasgow, and to get back home. So it is a really important service for them. So I wish McGills would just be a bit more cooperative. They always say they want to be a partnership agency. I'm quite up for that, but to do that, they need to talk a wee bit more to elected members and to the relevant officers. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Doig. Okay, Councillor Hood.
Formally second, with the right to come in, please.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hood. Councillor Jim Patterson.
Thanks, Provost. Just to kind of, I'm not aware of the local circumstances with this one, but myself and Councillor McEwen will be fairly familiar with this situation when a bus service was withdrew from a part of our ward in Gallaghill in the 64, although it's now changed its number as well, now no longer runs around what's called the kind of Gallaghill loop. Now, to be fair to McGills on that occasion, they did kind of engage with us on it. But the issue that we ran up against, and you might find yourself, Councillor Doig, is we tried to introduce a one-way system that wasn't universally popular. Many of the vehicle owners, which was fine, that they had some fair criticism, but and McGill's indicated if we could pull that off, they would reinstate the service, but it had to go through a formal TRO process, and it fell at that hurdle. So the difficulty you've got is the people who rely on the bus will back you up on these kind of changes. The people that have cars simply either don't know or don't care and won't engage in that process, or will be resistant to it because of the impact it'll have on maybe their ability to drive their car. And that's, I'm not downplaying those concerns, but I'm just saying it's a reality of it. So there's no simple solution. So you might find, I'm not aware of the local circumstances, the officers can get involved, they can come up with some really kind of innovative ideas, but the TRO process doesn't really allow for us to maybe make the changes that we need to quickly. And then when a service is lost, once it's lost a few months, it very rarely comes back. But that's just a wee point of information for you, Councillor Doig. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Okay, we have no one else wants, and Andy, I don't think have any amendments, so we'll just move to agree the motion. Agreed. Okay, that brings us on to what is now item 10, I think. Am I right?
Item 10 motion.
Motion 3, and that's councillors McNaughton and Kenny McLaren. Councillor John McNaughton.
Thanks, Provost. Firstly, I'd like to just acknowledge the recent sad loss of the TA building and the strength of hurt and anger felt by the local community in my ward as a consequence of this. It shouldn't have happened, and we must examine if lessons can be learned from this. That, I believe, is an ongoing exercise. However, the motion is about more than the TA building. It's about more than just Paisley. Renfrewshire has many towns and villages with listed buildings of importance to local communities, to our nation, and internationally important. And to that end, we shouldn't forget that the buildings are listed not just for their architectural merits, but in many cases for their historical significance. But forgive me if I focus on my ward, which covers much of Paisley Town Centre, containing Scotland's greatest concentration of listed buildings outside of our capital city, Edinburgh. You only have to look at the Historic Environment Scotland's interactive map to see the vast array of coloured dots indicating the cluster of the different categories of listing in the town centre. These listed buildings, the magnificent historic spaces that link them, and the whole ambience of the townscapes enjoyed by our citizens, and indeed many film sets, and I passed one just a couple of days ago in New Street. Too many of our important listed buildings are at risk as new uses have not yet been found. Some lie boarded up and abandoned, at least temporarily. It's incumbent on us to consider what more we can do to address the situation, as early intervention is always more successful than just crossing our fingers and hoping for the best. So what can we do? As covered in the first point in the motion, we should look to the Scottish Government and our Parliament to give us greater powers and clearer guidance. And I give the example of compulsory sales orders as one potential additional string to our bow that could help address the situation. It's good that the Scottish Parliament Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee is examining the losses of our listed buildings, and it's right that we should advise them of our views and our experience. Secondly, as the buildings at risk register, which has been suspended, we should ensure that we're doing all we can within our existing powers to preserve the important gems for current and future generations. To that end, we're calling for an update on each to be reported to the appropriate board. We need to examine that we're doing all we can do to encourage the reuse or maintenance in appropriate cases. The third point of the motion covers the artefacts or remnants which could and should be saved and reused if appropriate. I understand that in the case of the TA building, the magnificent door has indeed been saved for future use. There are many examples where parts of the buildings or the enclosures are preserved and reused, and they become part of our common good. Councillor McLaren might have more to say on that point. The final point of the motion calls for an examination of policy, including the tax policy, council tax and business rates, to encourage the reuse of disused listed buildings. It should be financially beneficial to owners to reuse the buildings, and there's more that we could perhaps do to encourage this. We could, as has been done in the past, allow enabling development in terms of planning to safeguard the listed building. We could even prepare, in certain instances, development briefs which for significant sites which would provide clarity to potential purchasers of the planning parameters that would be acceptable, which might help as well. It feels like we're just at a crossroads in respect of listed buildings, and it's important that we do all we can to preserve and encourage reuse for future generations. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor McNaughton. Paying your second to this, Councillor Kenny McLaren.
Hi, Provost. I'd like to formally second and reserve the right to come back. Thank you.
Sure. Councillor Gillian Graham.
Thank you very much, Provost. Along with my Labour colleagues, I'm very happy to support this motion. Renfrewshire's got a rich architectural heritage, and for decades, too many buildings have been allowed to deteriorate to the point of no return, and are a blight on our town and village centres. The councils aren't free from blame here, and I think it's fair to say that many councils across Scotland haven't invested in the long-term maintenance of council-owned buildings, some of which have historic importance. However, when you look at the buildings at risk register, most of the buildings at risk in Renfrewshire are privately owned. In some cases, the owners can't be found, repairs can't be enforced, or they're owned by anonymous investment companies with no link to the area or interest in the historic value. In these circumstances, I recognise that the council's hands are often tied in terms of what they can do. It's important that we do what we can where possible to retain our built heritage, and I hope that this motion and the recommendations within it will have positive results. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Eddie Devine?
Thanks, Provost. Disappointed that you ruled out the motion number 1, but I'll accept that. And this wasn't just to be about Paisley's buildings, as John McNaughton has said, it's and Kenny McLaren. This is about buildings in Renfrewshire in general. We've lost, well, the RAI is falling apart, the TA building's gone, the half-time school's gone, and others. We need to have as a council, we need to have powers, or somebody needs to give us powers that we have got better control over what has been knocked down with or without permission, or it suddenly combusts and goes into flames. That's got to change for councils. We seem to have no powers unless building services can tell me. So no building services, building people can tell us better. We need more protection than we're getting. If people looked up in Paisley and actually seen the middle of Paisley, what is above the pavement, they'll get magnificent buildings. And again, not just in Paisley, every town and village in Renfrewshire has got something that we need to keep. And I'm obviously supporting John and Kenny's motion, and I think much the same for the next motion as well. I think that's got the same kind of intent. So I'll leave that one there. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Eddie. I have every sympathy with what you were trying to do with your motion, but it just wasn't competent. But I'm glad that I'm glad that this is also on the table and you're able to support this. Councillor Ben Smith.
Thanks very much, Provost. I had to support the motion, and thanks to Councillors McNaughton and McLaren for bringing it before us today. I also agree with some of the comments that Councillor Devine had to say about the planning officer's ability to enforce planning decisions, and given the distribution of where power lies. Obviously, the responsibility for a lot of the things that have happened within Renfrewshire to do with derelict buildings, a lot of the responsibility lies on the actions of developers in some cases. However, I do think there is responsibility upon those of us on the planning board to obviously to consider each individual application, but to also consider the effects of knocking back hypothetical applications for old buildings, and whether it's the choice between doing something that may not be perfect or doing nothing, and it gets into a state of a derelict and disrepair. But having said that, I'm happy to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Patterson.
Thanks very much, Provost. I'll start, and I want to welcome the very I suppose solution-focused, measured approach for Councillor McNaughton and McLaren's motion. I think it's the right direction to go to try and get a solution to this, what is a difficult issue. I know it's still to be worked out in terms of the action of the motion, whether it will come to what board it will come to, whether it will be leadership, potentially economy and regen, or planning, or maybe a combination of more than one, just to keep as many people involved as possible. So I think that's important detail we can work out later. But I also want, I suppose, to thank many of the councillors who got in touch with me, the ones who did get in touch with me rather over the period of the TA building. I think their approach was appreciated as well. It was a sad loss, but I think there was a recognition, certainly within that situation, that we were basically not in a good place, and we were doing what we could at that time, and what is our understanding of the powers that we have at this moment. Although I would be happy for that to be reviewed, to see if actually, as well as doing this and writing to the Scottish Government, is there things we could be doing now that we're not doing, and I'm happy to explore that as well, and I think that's important. But I think the measured approach that the majority of folk took in this issue was appreciated, and I think it showed I suppose, the depth of feeling, not just about this building, other buildings, some private owned, some not. And I think if we can continue that approach going forward, that will be for the best, because that will allow us to, on a cross-party basis, save as many of these buildings as possible. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councillor Andy Doig.
Thanks, Provost. I'd like to endorse in particular the comments made by Councillor Gillian Graham and by Councillor Eddie Devine. I do think there's a real serious issue with this, Provost. Over the years, there's been a significant number of properties in the villages, private properties, and you have one in Kilbarchan about 7-8 years ago, which had simply been abandoned. There's one in Lochwinnoch just now, which is in the conservation area, as was the one in Kilbarchan. It was in Gateside Place at the time. And there's a real issue there because it might be through death, it might be through family breakdown, it might be through divorce, and there's inevitably legalities involved, and that makes the whole thing difficult. And it might be in some cases, I think families that are not who are in control of their estate are not maybe speaking to each other. There's usually a good reason behind it. Having said that, I really don't think we can ignore it any longer, because the one that's in the main street in Lochwinnoch is just in an absolutely dreadful state. It's next to the local GP surgery. It's really in a really dire state, and we need to. So, in support of the motion, I think for me, clause 4. Clause 4. Eddie and John will like that. Clause 4 in particular appeals to me. I would say we need to consider the options open to the council with regard to tax policy and other incentives, so that whoever owns these buildings, or whether they're in the hands of solicitors or whatever, that we put as much fiscal pressure as we can to get them moved on in some shape or form. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Doig. Councillor Graham Clark. Thank you for the photo, Graham. It's lovely.
Okay. Cross messages here.
I just thought.
There was a photo of the WASPI woman, just to be clear.
The WASPI women and the councillors, before I forget to do so before the end of the meeting.
So let me begin, now I can stop laughing, by thanking Councillor McNaughton, who's definitely one of the most skilled councillors in bringing this motion, and I really appreciate the work and the thought that's behind it. I have a couple of concerns though. I worked for a while as a photographer. I worked for Dundee City Council, photographing their housing stock through different decades, and have done that and looked at buildings, and I love Paisley because of its buildings. But not every listed building needs to be saved. There are some sites, and we're going to come up with them quite soon, where we have to consider a building of some value being demolished, because not to demolish that building will stop there being a development which is advantageous to Paisley. So I have concerns to protect historic buildings, but I also want to encourage us as a council to be looking towards imaginative architecture, and not to lose faith in there being good new buildings. And good new buildings also help towns, villages, and cities and places to be much better places. And so I think it's a balance, and I think that to protect every historic building would be a mistake. And so it's up to our planning group and board to consider all these matters wisely, but they do need more powers in order to be able to take some decisions to stop buildings which are of considerable value disappearing. Thank you.
That's a good point you made, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor James McLaren.
Thank you, Provost. I just wanted to say that I'm very happy to support the motion before us, and appreciate the thought which has gone into it. And I will hope to say more for the next motion. So I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor Andy Steele.
Thank you, Provost. I'm happy to support Councillor McLaren's motion, while a lot of this will fall under planning. With reference to point 2, I advise Chambers that a report is intended to be brought to Economy and Regeneration on the buildings at risk register, ideally from the next board cycle on, but imminently in any case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Councillor Eddie Devine.
I forgot to, or neglected to mention, I've got concerns over what's happening with the Paisley Centre. So I hope the planners are keeping their eye on that, and hopefully the planning are keeping their eye on it as well. And that's thanks.
I'm sure they are ready, but I have seen a lot of concern posted on social media, so I agree with you there. Yeah.
Question. The next motion is very similar, and I think James McLaren alluded to that there. Should we not just be taking the two of them together?
Well,
has that been considered?
Well, the motion from Councillor McNaughton did not specifically mention the TA building. That's why I have taken them separately. But I appreciate that you're pointing that out. Yeah, you would think they both are very similar, but I wanted to give John the opportunity whether or not to include the TA building or not, you know. Councillor John Hood.
Thank you very much. I used to go on tours with the great Derek Parker, and he would always walk down the street with us and say, Paisley's sick from the waist down, but when you look up, it's thriving. Well, in most ways, because I don't know if anyone knows, there was a hotel on the high street called the Crown Hotel, and if you look up, the Crown's still up in the roof. So that was absolutely fantastic, those walks, and obviously we miss Derek Parker because he was a wealth of knowledge. I do support the motion. The question I've got, would it be possible for the councillors to maybe get a list of listed buildings within Renfrewshire? Because I think it might be quite handy for councillors.
Yeah, a list does exist, John, which I'm sure they wouldn't have any trouble sharing with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Steele.
As indicated a few moments ago, there'll be a report on that coming to, if not the next Economy and Regeneration Board, then imminently, and that's what it'll include.
It'll still be on.
It'll still be on it.
There you are.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Neil Graham.
Thanks, Provost. We've lost many fantastic buildings in Renfrewshire, and we must do all we can to preserve them. I do welcome the motion and support it, and the comments raised associated with it. Councillor Gillian Graham and Andy Doig and others made the point about privately owned listed buildings, which tie our hands. In many cases, it does. But we must also remember that this council doesn't always have the best track record with listed buildings which we own. The Brown Institute in Renfrew was one of those buildings which the council owned and let it go into disrepair and subsequently demolished. So I think we also need to look in-house at us, not just at buildings that are in private ownership. We need to look at ourselves as well. When we don't do the right thing, and the council never done the right thing with the Brown Institute as well. Thank you.
I don't think anybody would disagree with you. I think we need to look at ourselves before we can dictate to other people. You're absolutely correct. Maybe one of the other councillors will address that particular issue if they want to. So, Councillor Patterson, I'm sorry, I didn't notice you with your hand.
It was just to offer some clarity to Councillor Devine's point. There is a live application regarding the Paisley Centre that will be considered at the next Planning and Climate Change Board.
So that'll give us more information on that. Did you hear it? Did you hear it?
I heard that.
Okay.
I'd like to know about it as well.
Yeah. So all members should be able to get access to that information. Councillor Kenny McLaren.
Thank you, Provost. I support all the comments that have been made by Councillor McNaughton and everybody else who's taken part in this debate, but there's just a couple of points I'd like to raise. As John mentioned, we think the front door of the TA building's been preserved, but there's an issue with that as well, because we know that it's important. If we can't save the building, there's certain aspects of it or artefacts from it that we should try and save. But apparently there seems to be some confusion what happened to the friezes that were on the side of the half-time school building. So if anything's getting saved, we have to have proper records so we know we can track them back when we need them. The other issue is penalties for developers who fail to comply with any planning guidelines. It's simply not enough. When they can just ignore the guidelines because it's cheaper to them than pay the fine. We need to. That's something we can't do. It's something the Scottish Government should look at. The other issue is maybe one for the UK Government. The refurbishment of listed buildings attracts a 20% VAT rate, yet new developments are zero rated for VAT. So you can see why developers prefer buildings to fall down by themselves, allegedly, so they can build a new development. If we could get a zero VAT rate on listed buildings, that would help equalise the field. That would help encourage real developers to preserve Paisley's heritage and history. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Kenny. Well, we have no other speakers. Councillor McNaught, would you like to sum up?
Thanks, Provost, and I'm grateful for the almost universal support on this motion. I think it shows the strength of feeling that all members have. A couple of points just to cover. Councillor Clark mentioned, and I support his position, that we just need to appreciate not that the listing is not fixed, it's a moving feast. New buildings will come onto the list, some will fall off, and unfortunately some will be demolished. But the important ones, especially the A and B listed buildings, are the ones that we should ensure that are never demolished if that can be avoided. The point that has been raised by a few councillors about the council's responsibility is a valid one. We have a responsibility to set an example, and we have a number of listed buildings, A-listed buildings, and it's important that we do set a good example on that. And to that extent, I actually want to praise the council officers in many respects, because they have done a tremendous job in a lot of cases, and we see the investment that has gone in and continues to go in. In terms of the half-timer school, that was a tremendous loss. But contrary to much of what's said in social media, that was not the council's doing. The council fought that tooth and nail, and it was overturned on appeal by a system that maybe didn't appreciate the historical importance, not the architectural importance, the historical significance of that building. And it's important, the point that Councillor McLaren raises about the freezes. They were part of that. They were conditioned on appeal. It was a condition that they should be preserved for future reuse, yet we don't know what's happened to them. I should just remind members that condition of planning application, this is never timed out. That could be enforced 20 years later. I'm grateful for Councillor Steele's comments on the buildings at risk register coming back to his board, and I'm looking forward to that. I think that's an important step forward. Finally, I think there are a number of points in here that we should be pursuing with the officers about how we make it more attractive to get these buildings reused, because that's how they're saved. Final point is in terms of what the communities can do. And one of the points that's maybe worth focusing on is the forthcoming local place plans, where community councils or communities can get together, and maybe it's open to them to identify areas of land or buildings that need attention and what should be done to that. And I think with reference to the budget we passed earlier, there's £100,000 towards supporting these local place plans. That's a major step forward. So it's not all gloom and doom, but there are elements that we need to address and going forward. Thanks, Provost. That's all I've got to say.
Councillor McNaughton, and thank you for bringing this motion. It's very important to all of the members here. But I think it's safe to say that the motion is agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. And that brings us on to the last, the final one, which is now motion item 11 and motion 4, and Councillors James McLaren and Neil Graham. Councillor James McLaren.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, much of what has been said already. Much of what I'm going to say, in fact, could have been applied to any of the three motions that were originally tabled here today about listed buildings. After years of trying to save the TA building, it was so sad that as time has gone by that it has been lost piece by piece. It does seem inevitable that sooner or later these empty properties succumb to fire raising. The council, along with the Scottish Government, need to do more, I feel, to save our heritage from demolition. I support the recommendations in all the three motions that were originally put forward before us. It seems that over the years we've lost countless listed buildings, probably going further back than the old Paisley prison for the current piazza, and more recently the old Peyton's Mill in Johnstone or Hermiston House in Bridge of Weir.
Yeah.
Paisley and Renfrewshire have a treasure trove of buildings that we need to look after to ensure their survival. So I'm sure you're, I'm fairly confident you're going to support my motion, but at this stage I have a suggestion for going forward. That is that council looks to set up an alio that would work rather like the National Trust of Scotland does. My idea for the trust is that it could apply for funding, take donations, and be bequeathed money and buildings, possibly to even buy up current listed buildings, repair, mortgage, let or sell, etc., and thus saving Paisley's and Renfrewshire's heritage. It works for the National Trust for Scotland, so why not for Paisley? It's just a suggestion at this time, and obviously we'll need a bit of work, but in the meantime, I hope you'll support my motion. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I think that might be the subject of a separate motion at some point. But do we have any amendments to this motion? None. Okay. Councillor Neil Graham, do you want to say anything?
Just second and reserve the right to speak later, thanks.
Okay, we don't have anyone else that wants to come in, so I'll just ask the council if they will agree this motion. Motion made. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attendance and your great patience today.
Thanks, Provost. We see the picture.
Hope you get an early night tonight. The picture, I'm not showing you that. It's a very good photograph. It clearly